Hey everybody, Coldon here with another VOX Immortalis commentary guide. This video is for heroic Sinestra and Bastion of Twilight, and this is 10-man. And this video is a little late to the party, given that we're pretty far into tier 12 already. But this encounter was the only one that our guild didn't get a chance to really work on before Firelands was released. So we recently decided to work on our completion and go back and try to learn and get this fight down. So this video is for those that might be doing something similar. So I'll explain the overall mechanics and how we handle the fight as it progresses. But after the fight ends, there's going to be a special section added on that will help those dealing with the rack debuff on this fight, which is a pretty important mechanic, and it's complicated enough that I can't really explain it without doing a special portion. So you can see that the raid is basically loosely spread or bunched up near the top right of this sort of spiky circle on the ground. And then we have our tank on Sinestra and melee in front of us, and our second tank is sort of to the right of the raid, dealing with Twilight whelps. So you'll need 2 tanks and 2 or 3 healers. We used 2 healers just because the third didn't really add all that much, and we wanted more DPS. So the Sinestra tank doesn't have to do a whole lot, just stay within melee range of her at all times. She does physical attacks, and every 20 seconds or so she'll use a flame breath attack, which hits everyone in the raid, so you can't avoid it. But the Twilight whelp tank has a little bit more complicated job. They have to pick up all the whelps that spawn, and these appear every 50 seconds in sets of 5, but they spawn all around the room, and they fly in very slowly to the raid location. So while they're flying in slowly, they're building up threat on healers and things like that. So it can be somewhat challenging for the tank to pick them up. They also have very low health, around 200,000. So your tank needs to be very careful not to kill them prematurely. And I'll explain why in a moment here. So when Sinestra reaches 30% health after you engage her, she'll fully heal and start her second phase. So around this time, we're usually getting our second set of whelps. So you can see I'm trying to be careful and stay somewhat near the tank so you can grab them off me. So once he has aggro on all 10 whelps, we move to the back of the room, and you can see he's pulling them to the back right corner near the entrance, and we AE them down. Meanwhile, at the start of the phase, a friendly NPC named Kalen, who's just to the right of me there, has spawned, and he will create this protective barrier that everyone in the raid needs to hide within. This is to prevent death from Sinestra's Twilight Extinction AE, and once the barrier disappears, then you can freely move around. So meanwhile, the whelps, the way they work is the first time they die, they will spawn a puddle, which you see kind of in the top right there, and any whelp within the puddle, when it dies, will be revived. So the way to handle this is we kill all the whelps stacked up on top of each other in the back right. They all spawn their puddles, so 10 puddles in the same spot. They revive, then we pull them all out of the puddle, kill them a second time, and this way they don't revive a second time. And this keeps all the puddles in one location and sort of controls it very well. Now the puddles that spawn from the whelps will expand as time progresses. So this is sort of a soft enrage mechanic, basically limiting the space that you have within the room as the fight goes on. Once the whelps are handled, all your DPS, most of your range basically, should switch to Sinestra because she has a mana barrier during this time. And you want to get her mana down to about 50%, at which point she will shatter her protective barrier on the 2 large eggs on either side of her. You don't really get a chance to see them in the video, but these eggs should be killed quickly by your ranged DPS, so split your DPS evenly. If you have strong enough damage, which you probably will at these gear levels today, you can kill the eggs in 1 round before her barrier goes back up when she fills her mana. Meanwhile, there's a Twilight Drake that will spawn that should be tanked by the non-whelp tank because it has a Shadow Breath attack. And then there's a new ad, it's called Spike Caller, which should be killed by all DPS when they can. This has a unique ability it will cast in a moment here. There it is, Unleash Essence. This can't be interrupted by direct interrupts, but if it casts, it will hit everyone in the raid and cause them to take 100% of their maximum health and damage over a short dot. So it's pretty dangerous. But if you stun that mob, it will do a second AE in melee range. That's also pretty dangerous. Not as dangerous as Unleash Essence. But the idea is to actually interrupt the Unleash Essence on the Spike Caller with a non-stun, non-interrupt ability. So this means anything that sort of disorients or moves the target. So knockback, a death grip. You saw me using Hibernate. That works really well to interrupt it. Anything like that. And so if you interrupt the first cast with your DPS all on it, you should be able to kill it before it casts a second time. So that was phase 2 very quickly. So we're into phase 3 now, and this is really just like phase 1, except Sinestra is now back at full health. She no longer has a debuff on her that she had during the first phase, which reduces her damage by 40%. So she hits a lot harder, and Flame Breath hits a lot harder as well. To counteract this, Kalen, the helpful NPC, will give you a buff called Essence of the Red, which you may remember from Blackwing Lair. This gives you 100% haste and 5% mana per second, and it lasts for 3 minutes. So, for example, healers, all your melee or your mana DPS, you just can't run out of mana at all during this. It's pretty crazy. And it will take some getting used to, especially for healers. The Paladin healer and myself were having a bit of trouble getting used to being able to cast anything that we wanted as quickly as we could. But that said, it's a pretty cool buff, and it makes this part of the fight pretty interesting. It also means that as a healer, your mana is irrelevant during this entire encounter. The first phase, you'll use mana normally, but you should really just be DPSing if you don't have anything to heal. Just spend as much mana as you can, because once you get into this phase, you just go back to full mana, you won't be able to spend anything at all. So it's pretty weird. Anyway, so now I'll get into the other main mechanics of this encounter. The first one, and probably the most important to your success, is the Twilight Orbs that will spawn. These appear every 20 seconds or so, actually 25 I guess, and they're going to spawn here in a moment, you'll see. And they will spawn and target 2 random raid members that are not tanks. They will create this thin purple beam to indicate the person that they're targeting, and then they'll chase that player for about the next 12 to 15 seconds. When they appear, they have a short ramp-up time before they activate to indicate the target they're on. So about 3 seconds after they appear, they'll indicate the target, and then another 3 seconds after that, they'll actually start to do their AE damage. So this is basically a Shadow Pulse AE in a short yard radius around them. And it also creates a Twilight Cutter beam between the 2 orbs. This works very similar to the beam from the Halion encounter, for anyone that did that. But essentially, the idea is that anyone that gets hit by the Twilight Cutter beam especially is probably going to die. You can survive 1 tick of it, but if you do get hit with it and the Flame Breath occurs at the same time, which is common, then that will kill you. So the idea is no one gets hit by the beam. The challenging part of the orbs is that Blizzard designed it so that you can't really get assistance from add-ons or anything, because the orbs are not targetable. They're not considered raid bosses. They don't have any combat log entry to indicate when they spawn or who they target. There's no debuff to indicate if you're targeted, things like that. So it all has to be a visual recognition by the players involved. So you can kind of see, like, I have an orb on me right here. And so you need to recognize when it's targeting you and move away from it. So with our loose spread location in the top right of that circle, we have players targeted by orbs run them to the back left of the room. And then you can sort of circle around after about 8 or 10 seconds and come back to the raid, and they'll despawn by then. That said, some add-ons like DBM and Bigwigs do try to indicate who the orbs are on, but it's only an estimation. And they do this by analyzing the threat levels of the raid when they appear, and basically try to determine if a non-tank player has top threat on something at the time. But because of things like whelps and just the general timing of it, since it's not known when the orbs actually spawn, it's just an estimation, and you can't rely on the add-ons. Often they'll just completely say the wrong player. So again, it's just a matter of visually recognizing it. Meanwhile, you've still got whelps that are spawning every 50 seconds. So going into the second phase, or third phase really, we switch our whelp tank, so our paladin will take them over instead of the warrior. And he'll get a set of whelps. He'll move them sort of to the back right of the group, call for AE. The raid will AE them down, the puddles will spawn. Then he'll move them out of the puddle, call for second help with AE, and kill them again, and they won't respawn again. So it's much like the initial whelp kill of the first, after the first phase, but we're just doing it every set of whelps. And the reason for that is because we found that waiting for 2 sets of whelps, while it does up your DPS a little bit, because you're not killing them as often, it's a lot harder to heal that tank. So after 2 sets of whelps, either your tank bubbles the debuff off if they're a paladin, or you switch tanks on Sinestra and the whelps. So 2 sets are AE'd and killed, then that whelp tank will taunt Sinestra and the other tank will go back to whelps and just trade off over and over. And you can see the puddles in the back right are expanding as they go. So we've managed to complete the fight, and so now let's go into a little bit of an explanation of the rack debuff, which is the other main mechanic besides orbs that matter to this. Okay, so this section is for rack, which is a special debuff that is cast on a random raid member every 60 seconds during the first and the third phase. It doesn't happen on the second phase. This debuff lasts for 60 seconds, and it does shadow damage over time, which increases every tick. So around the 20-second mark or so, this damage becomes pretty much unhealable without major cooldowns. Now, rack can be dispelled with magic dispels. However, dispelling it will cause it to duplicate itself and basically jump to 2 new targets every time you dispel it. It will remember its previous duration, but the damage component will reset back at the original tick value. So it's a matter of balancing how much time you want to spend dispelling versus how much damage you can heal. The real key is to try to prolong the first target as long as you can. So we've zoomed in here to my grid, and if you look in the top left, that's my frame there. So I got the first rack application. It looks like a skull icon there. And in the top right, there's also a separate indicator I have for grid that will show the duration that a rack has been on that player. So the idea here is to wait for the 21-second duration mark, which is about to hit before we dispel it on the first person. So it hit 21 and I dispelled, and now it's gone on to 2 new players. It duplicated. So again, it remembered the duration, and don't be confused by the Twilight Whelp Spit attack debuff, which is a different icon. It's the skull icon with the number in the top right. So it's duplicated to our Warlock and one of our priests now. So once it's on 2 people, we then dispel at the 17-second mark. So this has allowed the tick at the 16-second mark to actually go off. And it's important that your healers communicate who they're dispelling in that second set, so that you don't dispel the same person and have the other person get killed. So I dispelled the Warlock, our Paladin dispelled the Priest, and now it's actually gone to 4 people, again duplicated each time. So we have it on myself, the Druid, our Hunter, one of our Priests again, and our Death Knight. So for this third round of dispels, we actually dispel after the 11-second mark. And we just kind of cycle through people, quickly dispelling that we can. Now you can also use like a mass dispel from a priest if you want, but the problem with that is that people tend to be kiting the orbs and thus won't always be in range, so it's better to have a backup system. So after that the third set of dispels, where we dispel 4 people at the 11-second mark, the duration on rack is low enough that we can just let it run out at this point. The damage will never be too high that it will kill anyone, that you can't heal through it. So rack is about to fall off, and there it's gone. Now, we're actually into the second phase right now. so there's not a new rack application, but normally in the third phase you'd have a new rack already applied on someone. It'd be back at the 60-second duration, and the damage would have been reset, so you basically repeat the process over and over. So let's go ahead and take a look at the transition doing third phase rack. Okay, so this is a transition to a rack that's about to end during the third phase. And you can see it's actually on 7 people, which is rare. Just means that the spell timing was a little bit exact. So we actually got one to skip over someone. But basically the same rules apply as before. And as soon as it wears out, a new application has been applied. This time it's on me again in the top left there. And so the same process just basically repeats. We communicate who that first rack is on, and we're going to dispel at 21 seconds for it. So during this third phase, especially when Sinestra doesn't have the 40% damage reduction, rack and the flame breath can be very dangerous. So it's important that the player with the first rack application uses any cooldowns they might have available to help them survive a little bit. And otherwise healers need to spam them to keep them topped off between ticks. So there's the 21 second, and I dispel. And now it's on one of our priests again and our paladin. And so this is just like the first process. And the timing, as I mentioned, the reason it works out like this is if you do 21, 17, and 11, then you don't have to dispel for a 4th round, which is very important in terms of just globals, especially if you're using 2 healers. So we've communicated who we're dispelling, and generally the way our paladin and I did it is if rack is on us, we just dispel ourselves. Otherwise, we'll communicate who we're on. So I got the priest here, and I actually misclicked there, so it went a little long, which is a bad mistake, but, luckily he was full health, so it was all right. And so now we've got it on 4 people, and this will be the final round of dispels, where we basically started up at around the 11-second mark. So that's rack. The real challenges with rack are just communicating, figuring out the timings, and not having someone that you need to dispel immediately be running around with the orb on them far away. So I sort of mentioned previously another reason that our orb setup works so well, sort of that loose clump, is that everyone's pretty close together. So even people that are running from orbs, as long as the healers pay attention and move a few steps toward them, they can generally dispel that player when they need to. So yeah, that's the rack debuff, and that really concludes this guide for Sinestra. Good luck, and thanks for watching.